Hello, this is Professor Kim Nelson with the Jewelry Design Department of the Fashion Institute of Technology, continuing in our series of tutorials for basic CAD modeling in Rhino. Back to my band ring. As I promised, I would cut away until I was ready to make a new step that would be more interesting than what was going on before. I have my main motif completed now. It's a little messy on the back, but it is a solid, single contiguous shell. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and make the linking motif. As you'll recall, or not, from my earlier tutorials, this is a 1.8 millimeter pipe. Diameter 1.8, which I then scale down in depth to 1.2 millimeters. To do that, I set a C-plane to one of the end caps and do a non-uniform scale around 0. I don't want to change anything in this direction. I do want to change this direction. I'll type in the equation 1.2 divided by 1.8. And I want nothing to change in Z, so I'll hit 1 enter. And that gives me my wire, which if I were going to use it as is, I would simply then flow along curve, like I've done previously. Okay. I'm not going to keep it the way it is, however. Just like in the other parts of the motif, I have different things in mind for this as far as the form of the piece goes. I'm going to extract the cap. Going to duplicate the border of the cap and then throw away the cap. I can turn off the pipe itself now. I'm going to create a square or rectangle around this shape. There are a couple of ways to do it. Let's try rectangle, 3 points. Quad, quad, quad will not do it. So quad, quad, quad will not do it. So let's try from center. I know that won't work either. So I'm going to draw it directly. Line tool, quad, both sides, hold shift, mirror over. Same line again. Quad, both sides, hold shift, mirror. And then trim away the ends. I could have also done a fillets to do this, but that's just as fast. And now I have a four-sided part, which is what I want. Okay. I want to split this in half. Midpoint. Click point option, mid object snap, click at mid. Now I have two curves. I'm going to delete one of these. I'm going to rebuild this one to 6:4 is fine. Record history, mirror it over. Turn on its points. I want this to have a groove in the center. And I'd like to have it have a lift here before it comes out at the end. I want the groove to be sharp. And noticeable. Perhaps not that deep. A little deeper than that. Done. Going to join that together. destroying the whole shape. Should be a closed curve when I'm done. I need to put a copy of this over at the end of my other end of the pipe. That'll be fairly easy to do. I will use the Orient 2 points option. I do want to make a copy. Hello? Hi. What's going on? Okay, I'm doing a tutorial, so I'll see you soon, okay? Have you eaten? Okay, see you in a while. Bye-bye. Sorry for the shrill phone ring. That was my kid calling in. Okay, so my boy. So I want a copy, yes. I want it scale, no. I'm going to use quad snap because I have that geometry on both of the areas that I want to use. So reference 1, reference 2, target 1, target 2. And that gives me what I need as far as that going around. Now, I have some options as far as how I can do this. I can try just doing a single rail sweep. I have my doubts as to how that'll work out. One rail sweep, section, section. Actually, it came out fine. So I will stick with that. So there I have my geometry. Now the one rail sweep, I don't know as we've discussed it, sweeps are entering into finished surface modeling, and I've been doing a lot of finished surface modeling in this piece so far. So a single rail sweep is just a rail and cross sections. So one rail, and then it's like a train traveling along the rail. Those two cross sections. You want to make sure that the arrows end up on the same corner. If this went around and came back, this would be the same corner. And that the arrows, now these look like they're pointing different directions, but they're not. If I move that even a hair, it's pointing the same direction. So, okay. So there's that. I will go ahead and cap it. It does give me a little bit of a strange buckling effect when I cap. I'm not going to worry too much about that right now. I've tried to get rid of this sort of thing in the past, and it usually doesn't work well. There's just not enough, and there's not enough polygons in here to display it properly. Is all that's going on. Okay, so going to fill at my edge. Oh, let's say 1/4 millimeter. See if that kept enough of what I want. It's a little too much. 0.15 is better. Okay. And now I'm going to flow this along the curve. This is my finished geometry. I'm not bothering to use history. I'm well past the maquette stage with this, so there's really no point. I'll go ahead and put the original in storage. Now, I have a problem. This is too high up. That's because I had already moved this element down in space. To line it up, I'm going to need to bring back the original row here that I have. I have it hidden. I'll just unhide it. And then I will move this down until it's the same elevation. More or less. It's going to be slightly different because it's not a pipe. But I can average it out and come up with something that's a happy medium for that. Go ahead and rehide these. Bring back my motif. See how it fits. It fits fine. If anything, I'm a little worried about how close these two surfaces are. That I might have a Boolean issue. I might want to lift it up just a little bit, but I don't think so. I think if I lift it up, it's going to be too visible over here. I'm going to leave it as is. So now what I need to do is I need to, I have two different trains of thought going with this piece. Class. One train of thought is to have it remain filigree. The other is to fill in the back sheet. If I fill in the back sheet, the messiness on the back is not going to matter to me at all. If I don't fill it in the back sheet, it will make a difference to me. So I'm going to prepare the file for either eventuality. Okay? So first I'm going to need, if I want to use it for filigree, I need to clean up the back. And I want to decide whether I want to clean up the back with this in place or not. Okay, it's time to do what I was going to do. This is going to get a little strange, as though it hasn't done that already. I'm going to copy and paste this back in. Actually, I don't even need to do that. I'm just going to export it out. I'm going to export out my link. I'm going to export it as an OBJ file. I'm going to accept Rhino's defaults on this window. On this window, I'm going to make sure it's all the way over to more polygons, as fine as it can be. I'm going to hit OK. Alright. At this point, I'm going to leave Rhino and I'm going to go into 3dcoat. Now, there are two tutorials up right now for 3dcoat on our website. Those two tutorials show you how to get around the basic workspace interface of 3dcoat. 3dcoat exists on all of our workstation computers. And it's downstairs in the lab as well. It's a Czechoslovakian 3D sculpting program. Does much of what ZBrush would do for $99.95, which is why I'm so fond of it. I'm going to bring my link into here to smooth out the back. This will be a very important tutorial to keep track of because you'll be doing this as you become more advanced modelers more and more often. I'm going to go into the sculpting room. I'm going to come over to the current volume. It always starts the same way, volume 4. I'm going to right click on that and I'm going to import an object. I'm going to find the object I exported and bring it in. Now, it's important to note that the orientation in this software and in Rhino is often flipped around. They don't have the same sense of XYZ. It's also important to note that until I hit apply, this piece of geometry actually doesn't exist in 3dcoat. So I'm going to do one transform. I'm going to rotate this so that it is facing up. Okay, just like in Rhino, X is red and Y is green and Z is blue. I'm going to take this X-axis, I'm going to rotate around it 180 degrees. There we go. So now it's facing up. After I do that, I'm going to hit apply. It's going to ask me, am I sure I want to do that? I will say yes. And now it looks really strange. It looks like there are two things in the same place. There really aren't. The first is just the visualization of what came in from Rhino. If we hit a brush tool, an actual sculpting tool like draw, that one will disappear and we will have one object. Now, how I'm zooming in, how I'm panning, how I'm revolving, you want to watch that on the tutorials from 3dcoat. So I have this in here. Now, the trouble when you bring something in to 3dcoat from Rhino is that 3dcoat and no sculpting program is really intended to work at the tiny scale of jewelry. You can force it to but it's not a good idea. So I'm going to come down here and do a couple of things here. There's a transform brush most of the way down the menu here. Oh, hang on. I am going to start over. I left an important thing out, and it will only take me a second to get back to where we were. There were parameters on that import object that were really important. Okay, so back to sculpt, back to import object, find my object. 3dcoat is a voxel program. Okay, as a voxel program, it actually sees things as three-dimensional cubes. Its native way of bringing things in is to bring them in voxelized. If you bring in your meshes from Rhino voxelized, they will be decimated, meaning they will not have nearly high enough poly count, and you will have an unrecognizable object, and it will never work. So it's really important that you have these things checked. Import without voxelization, respect negative volumes. If you had more than one thing you were importing, you would also want to import separate instances. We're not going to do that. Okay? So you'll notice that 3dcoat remembered what I did last time. It'll do that. So it's already rotated where I want it. I'll hit apply and yes, and we're right back to where we were. Okay? I just needed to show you that, otherwise you'd have imported voxel objects and you would have gotten something very different than this. Now I'm going to transform it. Transform means the same thing in this software as it means in Rhino. It means to move it. Okay? So, or change its position, rotate it, scale it. We're going to scale this. As I mentioned, 3dcoat sculpting software isn't meant for tiny objects. I'm going to scale my part 1000% and hit OK. This will give me a much larger object, one that is much more suitable for sculpting on with brushes. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do with this is I'm going to change, I'll go back and put it back onto a regular drawing brush. I'm going to change the resolution of it. It looks fine right now, but it's not. Once again, this software, 3dcoat, was actually engineered as a painting program. It's to paint clothing and whatnot onto models. So it's estimating Rhino's mesh beautifully right now to show you what we have. But it's not really what 3dcoat sees. To get a really good mesh to work with, we have to make it much denser. So I'm going to right click on this and I'm hit resample. Here's a tip. Anything less than 50,000 faces is not going to be useful at all for sculpting. I usually don't like to use anything under 100,000 faces or 200,000 faces. A good guide to start with is to do 10 times what it gives you, unless of course it gives you something less than 50,000 or 100,000. So I'm going to change this to 300,000 faces, and I'm going to go from good to smooth on the quality, and I'm going to hit OK. This is how 3dcoat actually sees my motif, and you can see that it's already roughish. Okay, if I would have accepted what it had started with, it wouldn't have been good at all. I want it finer than this, so I'm going to undo, Control Z, and I'm going to resample again. This time I'm going to take it up to 1 million and smooth. That's better. Okay, that gives me what I want. Now I'm not sure what's happening here. I didn't see this in Rhino. Okay, I will address that later. Right now I want to get to finishing out my bottom. So I'm going to change the material here. Right now it's in the default. I want to put it into clay material. It's just easier to look at, easier to see. This spectral background is kind of a new feature. It's not one I'm terribly fond of. However, it's one that's hard to get away from unless you change your visualization mode. Right now it's letting you look at this in perspective. If I click on it, it becomes orthographic, and once I do that, it gives me, it doesn't have a real perspective feel anymore to the piece, but it does get rid of that spectral background, which I prefer. And now I'm going to come in here and smooth out my back. To do that, I'm going to use a fill brush. I'll expect you to play with these brushes on your own. To change the size of a brush, I hold down Control, and then I right-click and drag to the side to make it bigger. I drag up and down to make it stronger. Come in here with Fill. If I hold down Shift, it gives me the smoother variant of that brush, which just comes in smooth detail. I'm going to increase the power of that fill and decrease the diameter of it. And by doing that, you can see I'm able to smooth that out quite a bit. I'm just going around filling and then smoothing. Now I have to be careful. I have to decide what I want to happen here. Do I want that lip to remain, or do I want it to come off? I don't know. I will decrease the size of my brush so that whatever I do has less impact. Looks like maintaining that edge is going to become more and more of a challenge as I go along. A challenge I'll face where each one of these overlap. The fill brush is just going in and putting in material. That's okay. And keep in mind, this is the back of the piece, so there's a limit to how much effort I want to invest here. But this sort of smoothing out is impossible to do in Rhino. Well, it's not impossible. It'll just take you the half-life of plutonium. And it's so much faster and easier in a sculpting program like this. Increase the size again. It is pressure sensitive, by the way, so the harder I hit the brush, I'm using a stylus, something you cannot see in the video, but I'm using a stylus, like we would in Painter. That green brush is when I'm holding the shift key down. It has a separate control for its strength. I was smoothing pretty powerfully there, so I tuned it down a little bit. Take the brush down. Fill and smooth a little bit. Fill. Smooth. Fill a little more. Smooth a little more. Okay. Fill. Smooth. Fill. smooth, and decrease the size of my brush. Fill, smooth a little. Smooth a little. Okay. Now I could spend more and more time trying to get these perfectly smooth on the back, but all I wanted to do was to have it look less accidental than it was looking before. I did not need to make these perfectly smooth. I mean, I can take the fill way up and get a little smoother in there. And there are, as you can see over there on the left, multiple brushes. All of them behave differently, allowing you to sculpt in many different ways on your material in here. I'm not loving what's going on down in there, but once again, it's a question of how crazy do I want to get with it. Because you have to remember that what you do in one place, you've kind of sentenced yourself to do every place. You see, when I smooth that edge, I, impose something upon myself that I might not want imposed on me. So once again, I'm only doing this at the back of the piece. This is detail only a dog can hear, so it's kind of crazy for me to spend much more effort on it. Alright, there are some, now having come in here, I have created this as my finished object. When I bring this back into Rhino, this is what I'll be working with. So when I see things like this, I have to remove them. And a touch with a smoothing brush will do that. Some of the faceted effect here, it's up to me whether I want to. I can use the smooth brush. And it's but look what happens. See that? It will actually eat the model. At this point, I'm going to take it from its faceted mode, from its surface mode. I'm going to take it into a voxel mode. To do that, I just click on the S. Tells me how many polys are going to be changed, and I hit OK. It's going to look very much the same, but it's different geometry. This is now a solid. It's very important each time you, before you bring something back into Rhino, that you voxelize it first. That'll actually remove overlapping surfaces and all kinds of messy stuff that other programs like ZBrush might leave behind. One of the beauties of 3dcoat is that it does have a way for you to get a very solid object, a guaranteed solid object. While the brushes have the same names, they behave differently between surface and voxel, and this is something that a lot of people hate about 3dcoat. Other people like, because it's like they get twice as many brushes. It is confusing, but the smooth brush has less impact in voxel mode than it does in surface mode, since I want to barely soften these areas. The voxel version of the brush is more suitable. I doubt those faceted areas would even show on my finished model. So this is really a just-in-case scenario. In fact, you'll see they don't really want to smooth out. Right there. I will be smoothing that edge, but I want to do it all at once. So I'm trying to avoid the edge until I'm ready to smooth it. Okay, that's pretty good. Now I caught the edge a little bit there. I didn't want to, but like I said, I'm going to be doing the edge anyway, eventually. This texture you're seeing is actually Rhino's mesh. When Rhino exports a model, it exports a mesh. That's what exports an object, or OBJ, or an STL. Rhino has what they call an optimized mesh, where it puts a great big loose mesh where there isn't much detail, and fussy tight mesh where there's lots of detail. That's really bad for a sculpting program, which basically wants a consistent density of mesh everywhere. It's triangles, whereas sculpting mesh is like quadrangles. So what you're seeing on those things is a texture of triangles. That are great big triangles because they're optimized. 3dcoat would never make such a mesh. It always makes quads. But when you bring in the Rhino mesh, it's trying to be faithful to what you brought in. So it reproduces the texture. I don't like what happened there. There are several ways to achieve this, by the way. One way you can do it is to do fill. And if you hold down the control key, you reverse the action. So instead of filling, it removes. Basically becomes a polishing brush. That's another way to smooth. It is tricky. I'd like to tell you it isn't, but it is. If you go over an area twice, you multiply the impact of your stroke. If you press harder, you multiply the effect of your stroke. So this constant consistency that we so like in our Rhino is really not what these kind of software was designed for. This is for a sculpted look. We're bringing a hard surface model into a sculpting software package, which presents us with challenges. And I am fairly confident that I'll be taking this in the solid back version, so I don't want to spend a lot of time doing this. just enough to show you how I would actually handle it, because that's the point of the tutorials on this project, is to show you how I'd actually handle the ring. And to actually handle this ring, if I were going to do it in filigree, I would bring it into 3dcoat to smooth it up. And you can see that crisp, hard edge that Rhino gave us is now all but gone. The piece is overall much softer. And that's okay. Also remember that at the scale this is going to be at, it's not going to be on a computer screen the size of your head. It will be a little motif on the back side of filigree. Now I did see an artifact, if you'll recall when we brought it in, that I wasn't thrilled with. I'm going to go look for that now. I'm happy enough with the back of it. It may have... nope, there it is. I was going to say it. I was hoping it fixed itself when I brought it in and voxelized it, but there it is. Hard to get a sense of what that actually is. It looks like a ripple. I'm going to use a series of delicate maneuvers with my fill brush. Going positive and then holding down Control and using it in the negative direction to polish. I don't really want to get into this very much because I'm afraid that if I do, I will so soften this detail that it will look very different from everything else, and I don't want that to happen. It was a just in case anyway, so that's good. This element is done, so now what I need to do is I need to export it. Right click here. I'm going to hit Fill Voids. Fill Voids fills any openings or hollows in the mesh. Make sure it's a solid. Didn't take long, it's a good sign. Sometimes that can take a while. And now export object. I'm going to export it as an STL. It doesn't really matter. STL and OBJ are the same thing. But I take things in to 3dcoat as OBJ, take them out as STL. It's how I keep track of what's what. To remove that off the end. .3dcoat lets you optimize a mesh when you send it out. It's always a good idea to do that. Remember, we made this thing over 1 million faces, so we're going to say yes. it'll let you reduce it. It says right here that you can take it 70 to 85% and all of your details will be left intact. I have found that to be very much the truth. So I'll drop it to 80. That's about the size of the mesh that came in from, well, a little bigger than the mesh that the Rhino came in with. But it's certainly a reasonable size mesh. Hit OK. And out it goes. And we leave 3dcoat. We're back into Rhino. I come into Rhino. I import. Motif STL. Accept the defaults. And it will come in very big. Remember, we scaled it 1,000%. So to scale it back down, it's 10%. Okay, so there's my motif. Now, one of the challenges in working with a sculpting package is that not only is the orientation different, but it never comes in the exact same way or position. So you have to replace it where it goes. So I'm going to rotate it back into Rhino orientation. And then I'm going to use my orthographic views to very carefully place this mesh. I will use zoom window to grab areas where I know I can get a really good feeling for how accurate this has been placed. Then I'll go to one of the other views and do the same thing. Move it close, then zoom window, to move it carefully. Now it won't match exactly because we've smoothed it out, but it'll be very close. Do a zoom window at the top, where it's more likely to be consistent because we did very little at the top of the mesh in 3dcoat. There we go. Okay, and you can see that it actually superimposes itself very nicely on top of that green mesh. Okay, I need to decide what I want to do with this. For now, I'm not going to do anything. I know I'm going to close back this. I don't want to go through the trouble of bringing that back into 3dcoat. But I will show you that I can now take this, mirror this from side to side around that central point, rotate them around this point 180 degrees. I'm going to put these on a contrasting color. We're running out of contrasting colors. And then, as you'll recall, this is actually mirrored from side to side. So I will mirror it over here. And these two create my repeating pattern. I'm going to put a copy of these two on the same layer as my surfaces from Rhino were in. I'm going to create mesh objects from all of these. Surface, There we go, mesh from NURBS object. Now skew it up a bit. And then I'm just going to hit delete to throw away the NURBS versions of those. Okay. That is interesting. I have a little bit of an overlap. I'm seeing something here that I did not see clearly before. I'm going to move these down just a little bit. 1/10 of a millimeter at a time. Until this goes away. Should do it. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to keep that. Okay. I'm going to do mesh boolean union. Mesh boolean union here. Okay. Actually, I'm going to put this on a different layer because I need to get those out of the way. I'm going to mesh boolean these two together. And I'm going to copy them. On down. Okay. And Boolean union them again. Yes, you can Boolean meshes. Okay, I need to cut the end of this. So I'm going to do a cutting plane. You can cut plane meshes. However, I will not be able to Boolean with a mesh, so I need to convert that into a mesh object. And then I'll delete the NURBS object. Analyze direction. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to copy this out. Notice how it takes right on a minute. Meshes are much more dense than NURBS surface. They take a lot more memory. Mesh Boolean difference. I want to keep the input, so delete input equals no. Change the direction. Paste back in. Mesh Boolean difference. This time I can delete the input. I don't need it anymore. So I have these two pieces. And this piece I will move from that point to this one. And mesh union. And now I have my finished filigree pattern. All I have left to do with it is to flow it. I will emap it first so we can take a look at it flat. E-mapping will be very fast because it's already a mesh. Usually when you hit E-map or shade, Rhino has to generate the mesh for you to look at, but when you're dealing with a mesh object already, there's no mesh to be generated. I'm going to flow along curve. Transform, flow along curve. I will put those into storage. And there is my model. If I'm going to keep it filigree, then I would turn these into mesh and Boolean union them as well. I don't want to do that just as yet. I have some decisions I'm still making. But there is my ring in its filigree version. Including the smoothed out backs done in 3dcoat. Now if I were going to really keep it this way, I would probably bring these in and smooth the whole thing on the back. But it really isn't necessary. That's fine. Okay, that's the video for now. Thanks for watching.